So we'll give you our thoughts on this college debt loan forgiveness program, along with some of the biggest regrets that people have about retirement. More importantly, of course, ways to minimize those or ways to avoid them. So welcome to the program. This course is Dollars and Cents. I'm your host. I'm Joel Garris, certified financial fiduciary, certified financial planner at Nelson Financial Planning, where our team of certified financial fiduciary stands ready this week to help you change your life with a successful and cost-effective financial plan. So today, if you're watching our YouTube channel, and before we came on air, I was still messing around with this thing. It is National Bow Tie Day. So one of our fellow certified financial fiduciaries at the office, Rob Field, reminded me that Sunday was in fact National Bow Tie Day, so had to wear the bow tie. It doesn't really look, looking at it here in the camera, it doesn't really look like it's tied all that great. But anyway, we wanted to recognize the day. Seems like there's like a day for everything, right? Chocolate chip cookie day, donut day, National Bow Tie Day. Anyway, if you watch us on our YouTube channel, you'll see us in a bow tie, and that is the reason why. Also today, I'll get a little personal, today marks a turning point, if you will, in my life. So this morning, early this morning, I put my son on an airplane to go off to school. So that son, Connor, is the youngest, which means that for the rest of the day, I get to sit around and think about what an empty nest looks and feels like, it because it will in fact be that. So sort of one of those life transition days, if you will, for me personally. So as is this time of year, a lot of folks sending kids off to college and things like that, and certainly we are experiencing a different time, I guess, going forward. So anyway, on to financial stuff, if you will. Certainly a week like this past one, which obviously wasn't a particularly good one, most of it because of Friday, and in particular, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell's comments at the fabulous Jackson Hole, Wyoming summer seminar or summer retreat or whatever they call it out there, made comments that certainly did get the market's attention. And so one of those biggest things is basically the battle, if you will, that we've been talking for many months here on the program between interest rates and inflation, certainly far from over. And I think perhaps maybe the markets were thinking that it might be over, or at least getting over, particularly looking ahead to next year. But Powell sort of popped that bubble pretty quickly with his comments on Friday, saying that higher interest rates or additional interest rate increases were certainly going to be on tap for the road ahead, and even going so far as to suggest that there would be some pain for Americans going forward as we go through that environment. So that certainly is not a positive message and picture that was being painted on Friday, obviously leading the markets to have one of their worst weeks in several months as a result of that. I think Friday was one of the worst days in several months for the markets as a whole as well, simply because what is he talking about? What he's talking about is the fact that if you have to raise interest rates to help keep inflation in check, higher interest rates are always going to be an economic drag. The reality is that when you raise interest rates, it increases borrowing costs for everybody. So whether it's the consumer trying to get a mortgage, or the consumer that's battling credit card debt, or for that matter, the business that is trying to finance a building of a factory, all of those costs go up when interest rates go up. So, as you might well imagine, if the interest rate's going up and the cost is going up, well, then maybe you as a consumer or as a business hold off on doing that thing that you were going to do, whether it's buying a house or buying a new sofa or something like that. Or as a business, maybe you hold back, maybe you even get to the point where you're really having to cut costs, which then translates into laying people off. So those are all the things that can come as you raise interest rates. And so that's the pain, if you will, that Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, was talking about on Friday. And I think that gives us always an opportunity, particularly with weeks like we just had, to sort of recap and share some of the investing fundamentals that we always talk about here on the program. We also have some interesting stats to share with you as well. So the two primary investing fundamentals that we talk a lot about on this program are to be consistent and to be diversified. Sounds really simple, but we all know in practice it's much, much harder than it appears to be, because all too often human emotions get in the way, and so consequently that causes us to make decisions that aren't necessarily in our long-term best interest. So here are the two most recent stats on why being consistent and why being diversified is certainly something that you need to be aware of. So here's the first statistic, why consistency is always a good idea. And very simple, if you miss a little bit or miss just a handful of days out from being an investor, then you have the potential to miss a lot more than people realize. So here's the stat. Over the course of the last 30 years, from August the 1st, 1992 to July 31 of 2022, the S&P 500 gained on average about 10% per year. If you remove the very best 22 trading days over those 3 decades, so that's 22 days out of the 7,554 trading days in a 30-year period, the return as measured by the S&P 500, which is generally thought of as one of the broader market indexes made up of 500 of the largest companies in America, drops to half, 5% per year. And when you hear these numbers, you must be thinking to yourself, can that really be right? Can it really be that dramatic in terms of if I stay invested over a 30-year period of time, I get a 10% annualized return, but if I miss just 22 days, that 10% annual return every year for a 30-year period drops all the way down to 5%, in half? My goodness. Well, the reality is that people forget. People always think that volatility means that the market's going down, like Friday, but volatility also means that things go up as well. And certainly you have a tremendous amount of good days that generate a lot of the return on the positive side as well. So certainly a statistic that underscores to be consistent, because there's no way that you're going to be able to be successful on predicting those good days, those bad days, and ultimately shift things around in order to miss or gain. It's not going to happen. You're not going to be successful at it. So be consistent. We'll summarize up the Be Diversified piece when we return here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. Well, this segment may offend, I don't know if it's going to offend many people. Shouldn't, okay? But we're going to be talking about this college loan debt forgiveness stuff and why our view is that it is not an appropriate type of action to do. So we're going to get on that, okay? And we're going to probably get on a little bit of a tirade. So if you're a regular listener to the program, you're just going to have to bear with us because it's going to affect your wallet. Whether you have a student loan or not, it's going to affect you. Because when you add over $500 billion of additional debt, of additional obligation to the balance sheet, I don't care who you are, okay? Granted, you're the U.S. government, pretty big, you can print money, you can also raise taxes. So there's a lot going on there that at the end of the day, that is a huge amount. And by the way, okay, if you know the eligibility, and we're going to get into all this here in this segment, if you know the eligibility income limits, you're going to really be scratching your head as to why somebody that's making a married couple making a couple $100,000 plus is eligible for any of this. Anyway, before we get to that, we're going to wrap up what we were talking about in the last segment, which is this notion of the two fundamentals and some interesting stats. We gave you the one on why it's so important to be consistent, but also be diversified. And I think this one, we want to highlight this one a little bit because at the end of the day, there may be less diversification in your portfolio than you realize, particularly in light of the statistic that we're going to share with you this morning. Because it's one thing to say, okay, I'm diversified, I got a bunch of funds, I got a bunch of stocks, whatever the case may be, but it's more important to make sure that what you actually own, sort of all those underlying holdings inside those funds, does in fact represent a diversified portfolio. And here's the biggest stat that you need to be aware of and to watch out. So once again, we're going to go back to the S&P 500. That was the barometer, the statistic that we gave in terms of being consistent. The S&P 500 over the course at the end of July of this year, 2022, as we know, the S&P 500 intended to represent sort of the average capitalization of the 500 largest companies in America, hence the name S&P 500. There's got to be 500 companies in there. But it is a market cap weighted average. It's not an arithmetic average. So that means that the bigger the company is, the more it's going to have a greater weight in the portfolio. And so consequently, what happens is the bigger companies drive more of that index. How much more? Well, here's the stat. At the end of July of 2022, the 42 largest stocks in the index drove 50% of the performance of said index, in essence carrying the same weight in the performance of the index as the 462 other stocks in the index. So you got 42 stocks in the S&P 500 driving half the performance, and then the 462 driving the other half. So certainly something to be aware of when we think about diversification, because if it's just the largest companies that are driving the majority or half of the performance of the index, then perhaps you may not be as diversified as you thought, particularly if you're owning index-oriented types of funds. So one of the things that you really want to do as an investor on a regular basis is sort of do an x-ray, if you will, on your portfolio and look at the names of the companies that you have on an aggregate basis and make sure that they're not driving the vast majority of the performance of your portfolio. There are tools out there that you can do. That's certainly a tool that we use all the time on client portfolios in the office. But what you really want to do is make sure that you have a good idea as to exactly what the concentration is on a particular company inside your portfolio. So certainly be consistent, be diversified, even after a week like we had. Certainly some key concepts when it comes to investing and being successful as an investor over time. Welcome to the program. This, of course, is Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. My name is Joel Garris. I'm a certified financial planner, certified financial fiduciary at Nelson Financial Planning. The program here available on, of course, live here on a variety of stations throughout the Central Florida region. Also, one of the top 25 financial planning podcasts on the World Wide Web. So make sure you check us out on your favorite podcast channel and be sure to subscribe to us as well, so you know when we put up new content and the like. If you watch us on YouTube, well, then you know, as we mentioned earlier in the program, it is National Bow Tie Day, so hence the bow tie, although again, not really tying all that great. But anyway, happy National Bow Tie Day as well. So we warned you earlier in this segment that we were going to go on a little bit of a tirade here in terms of this college debt. And I want to start the tirade by a little bit more of my personal story. I grew up in a single parent household in a small town in Maine. It happened to be the capital, still a small town. I think it's like 17,000, 18,000 people. My mother was a third grade school teacher. That was the only source of income that was coming into our household. And I think teachers, I mean, she's been retired for 15, 20 years. I don't know that she ever made more than like 40 grand on an annual basis as a school teacher. That's a whole nother conversation about how teachers should get paid, but that's the reality. So that was my background. And so because of that, I made a decision to go to a state school. I went to the University of Maine. If you go kind of to the end of the world and go past it, that's where that school was located. Not really, but it's pretty far up north, that is for sure. I didn't get the benefit of these nice Florida summers, that's for sure. Anyway, I went there because I could go there and it was free between Pell Grant scholarships, things like that. I graduated from undergrad with a couple of engineering degrees without any debt. After that, worked for a short period of time, about a year, and then took a gap year. I guess it's called a gap year now. After that, I went to law school. Okay, and borrowed a bunch of money to go through law school. I mean, that was my choice as an engineer. I thought it would be good to go to law school, maybe do some patent work. Obviously, the journey of life redirected that on a number of occasions. But the point is, made a decision, went to law school, borrowed $70,000. I think when I graduated, I borrowed, it's 3 years. Okay, law school's pretty, I mean, a lot more expensive now. Back then, it was certainly expensive. Graduated, owed about $70,000. My wife went to law school as well. She went at night. She wound up borrowing about $50,000, a little bit less based upon you going at night, things like that. And she was working full time while she was going to law school. Anyway, so we were a couple in our 30s with about $120,000 of law school debt. That was what the picture was. That's what you did. That was clearly a choice. No one made me go to law school. No one said, I mean, as an engineer, I'm certainly making good income in that regard. My wife was working in DC and making good income. Again, we made the choice to go. At the same point in time, my choice of where I went to college also was dictated by the financial reality. The financial reality is by going to a state school at that point in time with Pell Grant scholarships, things like that, I was able to get to graduate without having any student debt. Thereupon, I went to graduate school, borrowed a bunch of money. So that's the personal background. So now we have this debt forgiveness program. We're going to take a break. We're going to break down some of the numbers and, you come to your own conclusion as to what the real scoop here is. Coming up next here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. Talking a little bit about this college debt forgiveness stuff. Before the break, we were sort of sharing with you our personal journey. Certainly, when we went to undergrad, made a decision to stay in state because that was a way to graduate from college without having any debt. Subsequently, my wife and I both made the decision to go to law school, borrow money, things like that, and ultimately worked hard to pay off all of that debt. Law school not cheap, as you might well imagine. Even way back then when I went, it still was expensive. So we worked hard, paid those loans off. So when I hear about just $10,000 or $20,000 for a couple of that debt just being forgiven, disappearing, all of that, I kind of get a little queasy because, I made decisions and had some personal responsibility and got that stuff squared away. So I'm not sure why the rest of society can't. And I get that we want to help folks, but then I hear the next piece of this discussion, which I think is the piece that you might want to listen to. And that is the eligibility limits. So let's get those on the table. So if you're a single person, okay, your eligibility for this loan forgiveness is as long as you're making under $125,000, that's right, $125,000, then you are eligible for this. So if you're a married couple, guess what? That means you're making under $250,000. So let me get this straight. We'll do some simple math. $250,000, right? I mean, that's a lot of money on a monthly basis. $125,000, a lot of money on a monthly basis. If you think of it this way, it's like $10,000 a month, right? So does someone that's making $10,000 a month, I mean, it seems to me that if you can't figure out how to pay your student loans at $10,000 a month, then that's for a single person. If you're married, it's double that, $20,000 a month. You can't figure out how to make a student loan payment at those kinds of income levels? What? Not my problem. Very simply put, okay? You need to get your financial house in order. Maybe sit down and figure out what you're spending money on. Maybe sit down and do a budget. How about that? I mean, the reality is that from a forgiveness perspective, this is the other part of it that should bother you. Forgiveness, debt forgiveness, is typically treated as income. You pay taxes on that because you just got money that was income. At the end of the day, if someone forgives a debt, the tax code for decades has said, well, that's income. Well, guess what? This isn't even income. This isn't even going to generate any reaction on your tax return. It is 100% a gift from Uncle Sam. So it's tax-free even. I mean, which runs contrary to any existing tax principles involving debt. The estimated cost, as we said earlier in the program, $500 billion. That's right, $500 billion. Don't we already have a problem with way too much money in the system that's creating inflation? Which is why we're having to raise interest rates, which is why the chairman of the Federal Reserve on Friday talks about the pain that Americans are going to have going forward in order to get this stuff under control. And then we just throw another $500 billion into the mix. Now, these are federal government loans. So that means it's on the balance sheet somewhere as on the federal government, right? Who's going to pay for that, right? I mean, who's going to pay for that? And where are you going to get the money to do that? You're going to take it from your Social Security? You're going to take it off of Medicare? Where are you going to grab it? Where are you going to get it? This is a sad statement that I think has ripple effects through all aspects of life. When we talk about financial planning, when we talk about having your financial house in order, that really does require a lot of personal responsibility. At the end of the day, that's what it takes. Okay, winning the lottery and thinking that that's the strategy that's going to solve your financial problems is silly. First of all, whenever you win the lottery, most people don't realize that like half of it goes away in taxes. So it's not like, you're really getting all of that money. There is that tax man grabbing that portion. And so when you think about stuff like this, I think it goes to the greater conversation about how to be prepared financially, how to be prepared financially for emergencies, how to be prepared financially for retirement. It's about personal responsibility. It's about making decisions. Decisions, choices have consequences. And so at the end of the day, for something like this to come in and to generate that additional amount of debt that we as taxpayers are going to have to pay for, regardless of whether we went to college or not, regardless of whether we paid loans, regardless of whether we paid our loans off, it's now a shared problem. Fundamentally, I have a problem with that. And I think you should as well. I understand we want to try and help people, but maybe there's better answers. Maybe it's holding colleges accountable for how much they're raising costs. Maybe it's holding colleges accountable for ultimately the results that they are producing. Maybe it's holding individuals responsible for the choices that they make, not just coming in and saying, don't worry about it. We're going to take all that personal responsibility off of your hands. We're going to take all that accountability off of your hands, and we're going to just come in and fix it. How? Oh, well, we'll probably tax everybody accordingly in order to get that. So, I wonder if they're going to give a tax exemption for folks that had college loans and paid them off. I wonder if they're going to do that. Probably not. Anyway, so there you have it. Okay, I might have stepped on one or two toes out there. Okay, I'm not sure I'm really sorry about that, because at the end of the day, it's the same way, it's the same argument in terms of finances and financial security and how you better yourself just as a human being. You make choices, you take personal responsibility for those choices, and at the end of the day, your choices have consequences. Don't expect someone to come and say, that's okay, we will just take care of that. Although, I guess fundamentally that may be more and more the world that we live in, which scares the you-know-what out of me. Anyway, I guess that's enough of that. We shall move on. Speaking of moving on, have you checked out our blog posts recently? You know, we do those every single month at Nelson Financial Planning, so make sure you check them out. We posted the latest one just recently, so go to our website, Nelson Financial Planning, and check out our blog post. The one that we just posted actually talked a little bit about COVID, right? That's still going on, and the IRS and your taxes. Certainly with everything returning back to sort of that normal April 15th deadline, and certainly there was some different changes in terms of the ability to approach the tax return and getting things filed with the IRS. If you're on extension, okay, that's fine, but know that your time is starting to run out. October 15th is sort of the drop dead deadline for getting those taxes filed. So make sure you're hard at work if you haven't filed your taxes yet, getting that all squared away over the course of the next 45 days. Blog post also talks about some of the expanded child tax credits, some of the expanded child and dependent care credits, things like that, all of which are on the blog post and in detail. Also important to know that for the year 2021 and 2022, 100% write-off for business meals. That is continuing as well. Also, conversation about recessions and I-bonds as well, which we're getting a lot of questions on. So anyway, that's all on the blog post. Make sure you check that out if you want to know more information on those topics. I-bonds, recession data, stagflation, and some of the latest IRS changes involving tax credits. So we'll take a break and return here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. So what are some of the biggest regrets that people have about retirement, and more importantly, how best to avoid or minimize them? So we're going to be talking about that on this segment of the program. Welcome back to Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. We're Central Florida's longest running radio program, coming to you on a host of radio stations throughout the Central Florida region here on Sunday mornings. Also happen to be one of the top 25 financial planning podcasts on the World Wide Web. So make sure you subscribe to us on your favorite podcast channel of choice. Have any problem finding our channel on wherever it is that you're searching, go to our website, Nelson Financial Planning, And in the upper right hand corner, you'll see a bunch of icons. Click on the one that looks most familiar to you, whether that's Amazon Music, Spotify, iTunes, whatever the case may be, and you'll get directly connected to our channel. Make sure you subscribe once you're there. That's the way you can get notified when we put up new content. My name, of course, Joel Garris, Certified Financial Planner, Certified Financial Fiduciary at Nelson Financial Planning, where we got a team of certified financial fiduciaries whose job it is to help you improve your life by having a successful and cost-effective financial plan. So, what are some of those regrets, and more importantly, how to avoid them when it comes to retirement? As with anything, hindsight always 20/20, but when it comes to your retirement, you probably don't want to look back and say, oh, woulda, coulda, shoulda, because probably not going to be able to get back into the workforce instantaneously, nor do you want to, right, if you're retired. So we're going to talk about some of the most common regrets that we hear and how best to avoid them. Number one, as you might imagine on this list, is I wish I had planned earlier. And I think that's the biggest thing that people sort of don't think about. They put off, they ignore, and think somehow they're going to get to a retirement that's going to be successful. No, you have to begin with the end in mind, which means that you better be preparing and doing things along the way, because far too often people sort of forget the fundamentals, right? You gotta, when it comes to saving for retirement, when it comes to saving for the future, you've got to start by paying yourself first. I think all too often people, oh, I've got income coming in, I got expenses going out, and I'll save the difference at the end of the month. No, that's not a good strategy. The better strategy is to pay yourself first, meaning that before you start paying the expenses, you take a certain percentage right out of the gate off of that income and put that aside. Put that aside for an emergency savings account. Put that aside for your retirement. Put that aside for future expenditures. Start right there. Pay yourself first, because that's probably one of the most fundamental things in terms of avoiding the regret of, oh, I wish I had planned earlier. Same point in time, in that same vein, is this notion of being consistent, right? Time in the market, or time in on your investment strategy, not timing. I think far too often people sit and think, oh, I'm going to find the perfect time to do A, B, and C. The reality is you're never going to get an engraved invitation in terms of the exact timing to do that. So that means that you probably just want to resort to time in, not timing, when it comes to investing money. Way too many people wait for the right time, or use the current headlines, because after all, they're there every single day, as a reason to not do anything. So remember, if you want to avoid the regret of I wish I had planned earlier, well, then pay yourself first, number one. Number two, understand the concept that it is time in, not timing. And number three, I guess, if you want to add to that list, is understanding what your money looks like. Money in, money out, assets, liabilities. We often talk on the program about thinking of your life like a company does, right? A company has an income statement and a balance sheet. Income statement shows money in, money out. And chances are, if you're running a company, you want it to be successful, so you want there to be more income than expenses. Same thing applies to you personally. And then obviously on the balance sheet, assets, that's what you own, versus liabilities, that's what you owe. Clearly you want what you own to be much greater than what you owe. So those are some of the fundamental tools that you can use to help get yourself in that planning mode for retirement and for the future. Another regret, if you will, that people have, that you typically hear people talk about, would be, I wish I had made a plan for my income in retirement. This one really does get more into understanding the tax nature of what it is that you own and what the tax implications are going to be as you look to generate out income in retirement. It really doesn't, this issue, if you will, of retirement income planning, I don't think it's really a whole lot of focus, if you will, in the financial services industry as a whole, because there the focus is, okay, well, gather assets, increase assets, put money into assets. It's all about, what's going in and what's getting accumulated. But I think also what people have to understand is, okay, well, that's great, but what's the income going to look like? Where's it going to come from? What frequency? And more importantly, why? Because there's some tax implications that you're going to have as you go through this income in retirement. And so having a retirement income plan, not only know what your income is going to be in retirement, but more specifically where it is coming from. And also understand that life has surprises and changes and things like that. So you also want to make sure that you know where the flexibility is. Where could you get money from your financial picture that's going to be maybe a little bit more tax efficient and give you the flexibility to generate out that amount of money. And that's what a retirement income plan looks like. And so the importance of having that allows you to avoid the issues of not having one in the first place. And I guess that's particularly important if inflation is running high, right? Because if inflation is running high, then obviously being as tax efficient as possible makes the most amount of sense, right? Because after all, you're spending what you keep, and taxes are one way to take that money. So certainly some things to be aware of on that front. Number 3, and we're probably going to run out and have some continuation of this topic into next week as well. I wish I had made a plan for my spare time. Earlier this summer, Rob and Garrett, fellow certified financial fiduciaries at Nelson Financial Planning, did almost a full show on this particular topic of the emotional part, if you will, of retiring and how you're going to spend your time and what you're going to do during that time period, because so often work and the routine of work gives us that purpose, if you will, in life, and all of that routine changes dramatically when you wind up retiring, right? You're not going to be getting up and going into the office and things like that. And the reality is that for your physical and mental well-being, having that purpose, having that schedule, having that plan really is important for good health in retirement. So those are some of the things to be thinking about. We'll continue on with this list next week here on the program. This has been Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning.